Welcome, everyone. Glad you guys are here. So let's dive in first to Deuteronomy chapter 6. Let's just dive straight into the Word. And here, you guys should, I'm sure you've heard this a lot. If you've been part of Oak Park's family ministry model for very long, you've heard Deuteronomy 6 a lot. This is very central to everything we believe about partnering with parents. So this week we're looking at communication again. We talked about communication a couple weeks ago, last time we met. But also, in communication we're talking about a life of communication. So not just understanding what are the different types of communication, which was a couple weeks ago, but also how do you make it a lifestyle? How do you do it regularly, daily, make communication a part of it? But then also appealing to conscience. So that's chapters 10 and 12 from the book, chapters 10 and 12. And I think in the workbook it's like 8 and 10. So in terms of having a life of communication, right, we've already talked about communication for a couple sessions, couple weeks. But just in terms of having a life of communication, I think about my brother. Not because he does a great job at this, but because when I'm talking to him on the phone, I can always tell if the TV's on. So you start talking, and he's like, and then the stop. And so then I start making stuff up, because I know he's not listening. So I'm like, yeah, and, we got back from wherever, and we were walking into the house, and then a pterodactyl swooped down and caught Millie up and took her away. And he's like, So I start making stuff up, because I can just tell he's not listening at all. I'm sure you guys have never done that, but you probably know people who do, and so I think it's really tempting to do this as parents. I went through a season when I was doing youth ministry of doing this to my students in youth ministry. There's one particular guy, I'd pick him up from school and take him to the church, and he would do some stuff around the church, but then I'd also help him with his homework or whatever, and he'd just hang out. And a lot of times, I needed to get stuff done, and he's just hanging out. And so he's telling me all this stuff, and I was too nice to be like, hey, give me 30 minutes, and go do this for 30 minutes or whatever. And so I ended up just acting like I was paying attention, but trying to send the signal that I wasn't, so that he would maybe go away on his own, which is just not good. It's just really, really horrible. So, after being confronted on that, tried to repent of that and truly listen when I'm listening, and do a better job of that. And I think it's super easy as parents to let yourself trail into those kind of mentalities. Having a life of communication is just absolutely essential. So we're going to look at that more closely. Deuteronomy 6 will help us do that. So 1 through 3, somebody read that for us, please. Nobody's got it, so somebody just volunteer to read that.
This is the command, the statutes and ordinances. The Lord your God has commanded me to teach you, so that you may follow them in the land you are about to enter and possess. Do this so that you may fear the Lord your God all the days of your life, by keeping all his statutes and commands I am giving you, your son and your grandson, and so that you may have a long life. Listen, Israel, and be careful to follow them, so that you may prosper and multiply greatly, because the Lord, the God of your fathers, has promised you a land flowing with milk and honey.
Okay, so in just these 3 short verses, as it begins, we're about to get to what's called the Shema, which is the great commandment in the Old Testament. But he's building up to that, and he's saying, he's saying, this is the commandment. He's introducing it. But why? What does he want them to do, verse 1? Yeah, obey it. He wants them to obey it and do it in the land. So he's giving them instructions that they need. It's kind of like, stick this law. Deuteronomy is kind of like, hey, here's the handbook that you need to stick under your arm and you march into the land, so that when you get there, you obey it and you do it when you inherit this land. So you need to do it. But there's not just one generation represented here. Where do you see this other generations? I mean, this is a generational model. So you are to not only obey it, but also what? Yeah, that you may fear the Lord, but also who else? Yeah, your son and your son's son. So there's 3 generations here represented. So he's saying, you need to obey it, and you need to communicate it in such a way to your sons so that your sons will rise up and communicate it to their sons. So it's a generational model. The commandment of the Old Testament is a generational model. The intent is that over the course of generations, you're training up, you hear this a lot, disciple-making disciples. So you're not just training them to obey it, you're training them to teach their children to obey it. And that's the built-in model. So that's kind of the model I have for one-on-one discipleship as well. Like when we do one-on-one discipleship, I'm not just communicating knowledge to you. I'm trying to equip you with the knowledge that you need to go equip somebody else so that they can then equip somebody else. You find this in 2 Timothy 2:2, which I had Aaron look up for us. Count the generations as you hear them.
And what you have heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to faithful men who will be able to teach others also.
Okay, so you got to listen fast on that. Okay, so what you have heard from me, that's the previous generation, right? What you, Timothy, have heard from me, Paul, entrust to faithful men. That's another you then entrust to another generation, to faithful men, so that they will be able to teach others also. So there's 4 generations in that. Discipleship is a generational model. It's not just teaching, it's equipping to teach, equipping to disciple, discipling to disciple. So then he goes on, Deuteronomy 6. Now we get to the Shema. So somebody read 4 through 6. Nobody has it, so just...
Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. Oh, sorry.
That's okay. Yep, that's great. Just couldn't stop yourself. Okay, so, this is the Shema, like the command. You shall love this is the central command of the Old Testament. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. So, this is the parent who not just knows the law, but believes the law, and their life is, they're living it out. They're doing it. And that is absolutely essential in your communication. Because, obviously you know this, but how do we really need to apply this to our parenting. Are you communicating in such a way that you're saying one thing, but you're modeling something else? Or you really want them to be good, this is a good example, you want them to be good listeners, but you're modeling for them that what they say doesn't matter, or they don't have anything helpful to say, or they're not worth listening to. So you want to be a good communicator toward them, but communication is not just one directional. You have to be a good listener as well. So you are modeling it as well. So the parent who is, this is a command for us not just to know the things to talk about, but to be living them out. To be not just knowing them, not just believing them, but living it. So then, keep reading, Dominic, down to 9.
You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates.
So in 7 through 9, how does it describe communication? Just give me shout out some things.
Keep it visible, like the communication as visible.
Say that again.
Like, when you said number 9?
7 through 9. And for those verses, where does... visible. I know what you're saying. Okay. Yeah, you're looking at 9. Yeah, 7 through 9. But 9, yeah, it needs to be visible. So even down to like the way you decorate your house, you're communicating truth. It's in all of life is kind of the idea. Okay, but yeah, all of 7 through 9. What else does it say about communication? Repetition, constant. Yep. It's all of life. It's as you are going. As you are... Which it's so amazing. Oak Park, we have our mission statement. Which, can anybody give it to me? What's the mission of Oak Park is to... Good, yeah. Love Jesus, love people, help people love Jesus. That's great. So, you hear it every week, so you should know about it. So, that takes, what that is it's the Great Commandment, this passage, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, combined with the Great Commission. Well, both of these passages, the Great Commandment and the Great Commission, are as you are going. So in this passage, it's as you sit, as you walk by the way, when you lie down, when you rise. As you're going, as you're doing life, you are loving the Lord your God, and you're teaching it to your children. Okay? Well, the Great Commission, it starts out with, well, can I make the Great Commission in Matthew 28, 18 through, or 20? Yeah, go therefore and make disciples of all nations. So the main command in that passage is to make disciples. The other commands listed in that text, teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you, all and baptizing them, are all participles. So the main command is make disciples, but the participles are going, teaching, not in the order. Going, baptizing, teaching. And it's almost like as you are going, make disciples. So in the Great Commandment, it is as you're living life, as you're going, love the Lord your God and teach your children to love the Lord your God and to obey these commandments and to fear Him. The Great Commission is as you are going, make disciples of all nations, not just your children, not just your home, but of all nations to the ends of the earth. So both of them are as you are going. This ought to be lifestyle, right? As Christians, we are to be followers of Christ. That means every day getting up and taking up your cross and following Him. Not just a mental assent or, you know where I'm going with it, but rather a whole lifestyle. And that includes communication. We're going to read, but 13 through 25, if you read through that, think about the context he's talking about it in. So what ends up happening is your kids, if you're doing this, your life is going to look very different from the world. And so he's basically saying the context of this is when your children ask you, why do we do things this way? Well, why would that even create a conversation? Why would he even ask that question? It's because the world doesn't do it that way. So if you're parenting, if you have this subconscious goal of making your parenting look like everybody else's parenting, that's not a helpful goal. It's not going to create questions in their mind as to, wait, why do we look differently? If you look just like the world, then you're teaching them, even just subliminally, that, we just do what the world does. But if your parenting is going to be biblical, it's going to be different. Your decor in your house is going to be different. The way that the conversations you have as you're riding around in the van are going to be different. Like the intentionality with which you communicate with your kids is going to be different. It's going to look different. You're going to have much more intentional conversations with your kids than lost people do with theirs, hopefully, right? And God-centered conversations. The way that you discipline is going to be very different, especially now, in our day and age now, because we're starting from very different premises. In the world, what's the basic premise? That children are basically good. And all they need, really, is education. All they need is good education. This is why, if you notice, like, where you see a lot of the most progressive worldly ideas take place are in college campuses and in school systems. It's because those that are worldly and progressive believe at root that people are basically good, and all we have to do is educate them, and we'll have a better society. Okay, so they take over the educational institutions. This is why you have such ungodly things being taught in colleges and that sort of thing. That's their root. That's their philosophy. Well, what's our philosophy? What's the biblical philosophy about children? People are basically at the very nature, we are corrupt. We're broken. We're sinful. That's going to have very different conclusions. They don't just need education. Do they need teaching? Absolutely. That's one of the methods of communication we talked about a couple weeks ago, but they need more than that. They need an understanding that they are, which we're going to get there. We're going to get there. So I won't jump ahead. Okay, so look at Psalm 145. Everybody turn there. Psalm 145. I think this is super helpful just to kind of reinforce what we just said, Psalm 145, we're going to look at 1 through 8. So, I'm going to read this. As I read it, think about if you as a parent are to commend, verse 4, one generation shall commend your works to another. If you as a parent are commending God to your children, what does this psalm have to say about your commitment to the Lord? About your relationship with the Lord? I will extol you, my God and King. I will bless your name forever and ever. Every day I will bless you and praise your name forever and ever. Great is the Lord, and greatly to be praised, and his greatness is unsearchable. One generation shall commend your works to another, and shall declare your mighty acts. On the glorious splendor of your majesty and on your wondrous works I will meditate. They shall speak of the might of your awesome deeds, and I will declare your greatness. They shall pour forth the fame of your abundant goodness, and shall sing aloud of your righteousness. The Lord is gracious and merciful, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love. The Lord is good to all, and his mercy is over all that he has made. So do you see the generational component? What is it that what do we have to be in order to rightly commend the fear of God and the worship of God to another generation? As parents, we ourselves have to be what? Yeah, absolutely overwhelmed in awe of God, awestruck at him. So, look at verse 6. They shall speak. Who's they? Yeah, it's the next generation. The next generation. They shall speak of the might of your awesome deeds, and I will declare your greatness. They shall pour forth the fame of your abundant goodness and sing aloud of your righteousness. Do you want your kids to speak of the might of God's awesome deeds? Do you want them to pour forth the fame of your abundant goodness and sing aloud of his righteousness? If so, then you have to, verse 5, meditate on his glorious splendor and on his wondrous works. So it is rooted in our relationship with the Lord, which I think is so key. The greatest thing you can do in order to pass on your faith to the next generation, the number one thing you can do in your parenting is to work on your relationship with the Lord. That's the primary thing. If you are not, then you can do it, but it's going to end up being what? If you're commending it, but you're not living it, it's going to be pharisaical, hypocritical. And that's like a natural instinct that your kids already have, is to point that out. They know it. They know it. They know when you're being hypocritical. They know when you're not being genuine. That's convicting. That's super convicting. They can see through hypocrisy. They have like little hypocrisy radars. Beep, 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 beep. It's like, ah! They like know it. They get it. And that's one of two things I think that they just naturally have. They can just hone in on it real quick and figure it out. One is hypocrisy, but then two is they know who loves them. When we were thinking through, Sarah Bledsoe did a great job of just kind of thinking through from preschool up until they get to grade age. Like, what are we teaching? Like right now, what's happening in the nursery? Like Maggie is in the little walking 1s and 2s class. What are they teaching her? Or in the nursery, Millie's just in the nursery. She can't speak or understand English really at all. I mean, she knows dada and she knows mama and she knows, well, that may be it. So what are they teaching her? What can she pick up? Nothing, they can't teach her anything in English in a sense. I mean, you know, she can hear English happening. Yeah, it's her second language right now. So it's definitely her, English is her second language, which she hasn't learned yet. But what's her first language? Well, I mean, what are they genuinely teaching her? Yeah, I mean, and that communicates. She can translate and understand that long before she can translate and understand English. And that's absolutely critical. So they know, so that's kind of takes us to the next part. This is costly. Like this kind of communication, a life of communication like this is really costly. And so at the top of the next page, how do you count the cost? This is going to be, if you're going to do this as a parent, it's going to cost you a lot. So we need to count the cost in order to count the blessings of paying the cost. What's the cost-benefit analysis? What is the benefit of investing time that you otherwise would have spent on yourself, or time that you would have otherwise developed a hobby that you've always wanted to develop, or time that you wanted to, read that book that you've been trying to get to. Instead, you're sacrificing those things so that you can spend time communicating with your children better. It's going to cost you. That's the idea. So this first paragraph, children know. They know when you're being hypocritical. They also know, just naturally, they know when they have a relationship with people who are wise and discerning. They know when they have a relationship with people who are wise and discerning, who know and understand them, who love and are committed to them. And he says in the book, they shouldn't have to leave home for that. I'll tell you, Nick can attest to how often on Wednesday nights we have students who come from the neighborhood and they keep coming back. Even when we discipline them, we can't do much to discipline. We can just be like, we're going to call your parents and you got to go home. That's all we can do, really. But, I mean, how often have we disciplined them and they come back the next week? If they do something bad enough, we say, you have to go home and you're not welcome back here next week. And that on the third week, they're back. Because they know, they get it. I mean, they understand that they're not getting this at home, and so they come here because they know that our leaders love them and are here investing in them and pouring into them and asking them about their day and asking them about their life. They genuinely care. They know and they understand them. And they are not getting that at home, and so they're going to go somewhere where they can get it. It's really powerful. They can't communicate that, I don't think. They wouldn't be able to tell you that's what's happening, and they would probably never admit it. But at the same time, that's what they're doing. And it's interesting, having been a youth pastor now, over discipleship with children and youth, so many of you all come to me and have come to me in my previous church and here both, and there's this desperation that comes eventually, especially with students, and once you get in student ministry, there's kind of a desperation of, they need someone in their life to tell them these things because they're not listening to me. And I was always like, okay, yes, I'm here for you. I'm going to do that. We have people who are going to do that or whatever. We're doing that. We're going to help you, come alongside you. But you need to know as parents that they genuinely are listening to you. And they know that they're loved. And if you ask them, you can do this. They're pretty honest. So if you just ask them, what are your favorite pastimes? I bet if you walked in there right now and asked them, what are your favorite pastimes? Virtually every single one of them would say spending time with family. It's uncanny. I was, as a teacher at a high school, as a youth pastor, I'm telling you, they all say that. Spending time with family. They love it, and they can't get enough of it. And so you as a parent, you think, because, teenagers are teenagers, they want you to think that they're not listening, or they want you to think that they don't really care about what you think or whatever. They do. And they know when they're loved, and they know when there's someone who's wise and discerning who's giving them input, even if in the moment they seemingly reject it. So do not sell your influence short in general. but then strive to have even more influence, even better influence. So this is where he gives us this chart, authority and influence, as they get older. So it's 0 to 18 and beyond. But as they get older, your authority in a sense of, I mean, he gives the illustration of like when you have a newborn, you have all authority over their life. I mean, they can't do anything. They can't even wipe themselves. You know what I mean? It's like you have all authority, and they're going to go where you take them because they can't do anything on their own, and they're just like completely dependent on you. So you have all the authority, but your influence, in a sense, like because they don't even have their own authority to do anything or to independence, your influence doesn't really exist yet. But then as they get older, your authority goes down. When they begin walking, you know your authority goes down, right? You have less control in one sense. And then more and more as they begin to dress themselves and as they begin to, they get the keys. I mean, there's like more and more and more authority that they have. They're more independent. You guys know this. But hopefully, at the same time as your authority, from y'all's perspective, is going down, you can't pick them up and take them where you want them to be when they're a teenager anymore. But your influence is going up. So your influence is going up so that he gives the example of like an advisor to the president. An advisor to the president has zero literal authority. They can't like sign executive, what is it? Order. Yeah, they can't do that. They can't, they can't veto a bill. I mean, they don't have any actual power, but how much influence do they have? Can have immense power, so that they're not the ones maybe doing it, but they have the influence over the ones who do it. And so we have to cultivate their whole life, cultivate using communication, cultivate the kind of trust that when they're older they will listen and they will follow and obey. So he says, children trust you when they know you love them and are committed to their good. When they know you understand them and their strengths and weaknesses. When they know that you have invested yourself in encouragement, correction, rebuke, entreaty, instruction, warning, understanding, teaching, and prayer. Yes, even rebuke, warning, those things, they trust you when they know that you've done that. I think that is actually one of the most powerful things on that list for them trusting you. I've known of situations where the parents are real soft on discipline. They're not doing any kind of discipline at home, and maybe they drop them off with like a daycare or with somebody who's watching them during the day, and there's discipline there. There's like expectations there, and maybe even higher than what the parent has. And so when something happens, you can tell the kid trusts the daycare provider more than they trust the parents, because the daycare provider disciplines them and has expectations for them that are greater than their parents, because their parents want to lower the expectations so they can succeed easier, which we'll talk about that. Have you guys seen that take place at all? How have you seen even rebuke and discipline and those things create trust and create trust and love?
I think even Caden at 18 months old, I always laugh that when Daddy gives him a spanking, first thing he wants is for Daddy to hold him.
Mm-hmm.
And he immediately goes right to Maverick.
Mm-hmm.
After, he's crying because Maverick just gave him a spanking because
Mm-hmm.
he disobeyed. And he turns around and immediately wants to go to whoever just spanked him.
Mm-hmm.
Like an apology almost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, reconciliation and
Yeah.
yeah.
Probably just sit with you, and then oftentimes he doesn't do it immediately. Usually within like a few minutes, like, I'm so
Mm-hmm.
See that, they, like, there's goodness, but there's also, like, made in the image of God, and that, like, yearn for that love, and with their parents and their food. And so when you correct that, it puts them back on that trajectory.
Mm-hmm. It's really beautiful. And this is reflecting something. This is a microcosm of something way greater. And that's the point. Just like the sermon series we just did, like, what's the point of baptizing? We're not washing their sins away when we baptize. The point is it points to something greater that's already happened in their heart, right? So in the same way, when you discipline your child, you're just giving them a teeny tiny little picture of their relationship with God. That the Lord loves, the Lord disciplines those whom he loves. He says he's treating you as a father. And so if we neglect that, we're neglecting a whole aspect of what you want their relationship with God to be. God is a God who disciplines because he loves us. And he doesn't leave us in our sin or our error. He disciplines us lovingly. Keep putting us back on the path, right? He says you can't kick against the pricks to Paul. I mean, he's pricking him hard. So much that he falls down on the street. I mean, the conviction, right, comes in really harsh, and the discipline comes in harsh, and he says, don't hate it when the Lord disciplines you. He's treating you as sons. It's a sign of his love for you. So in the same way, when you discipline your son, when you discipline your child, you're reflecting the heart of the Father and teaching them how to relate to a God who disciplines. If you don't do that, you're going to confuse them. You confuse the heck out of them. So that when God does lovingly discipline them, they're just going to think that he's a vindictive, right? Like they'd never seen discipline that was loving, then they're going to assume God is that way. He doesn't know how to discipline out of love. Really dangerous to do that. So I think he gives a really great definition of communication to kind of get to the heart of what he's talking about here. Communication, he defines as the art of expressing in godly ways what is in my heart. So communication is the art of expressing in godly ways what is in my heart. So it's not just expressing, though, but also of hearing completely and understanding. And this is the more important part, obviously. We're really good at the first part. Well, hopefully. Expressing in godly ways, maybe not that part. What is in my heart, and of hearing completely and understanding what another thinks and feels. So I always give, if you've heard me ever teach or preach or anything, I always give this illustration. I think it's really helpful. In Jesus' day, teachers would often sit and listeners would stand. So like you see him like in the Sea of Galilee, he sat down and taught them. So in that day, the discipler, the rabbi, would sit down to teach, and then the disciples would stand to listen. And I don't know if this is true or not. But I think the idea is that they understand which one takes more effort. It takes way more effort, way more focus, way more energy to be a good listener than it does to express yourself. And so I always thought about doing that in my classroom when I was teaching. Is like, okay, I'm going to sit down. You guys all stand up for the hour. And I would teach, and they had to stand the whole time just so they're more focused. I thought, man, it seems like, I don't know, maybe that could be helpful. But yeah, it takes way more effort for you to be a good listener. You have to be focused. You have to be concentrated, right? And what do we often do when we're listening, when we're not talking in a conversation? Yeah, and you're thinking about what you're going to say when you respond. You're waiting for a chance to respond, but you're actually not seeking understanding from them. You're assuming what I have to say is way more important, so I don't really need to listen to what they're saying. What I need to be doing is like formulating how I'm going to, when I get the chance, what am I going to say back? Or what am I going to come up with that's going to be really good to in this conversation? And so we end up missing people. We end up missing our own kids. Because we're not actually listening to what they're saying. We're just waiting for the opportunity to, come down hard. Okay, so last class has been 2 weeks, so I don't know if we'll get this, but give me those types of parental communication, different types of communication we talked about 2 weeks ago. Cheating is completely allowed. Anybody? So remember we talked about how parenting cannot just be boiled down to rules, correction, discipline. It's not just rules, correction, discipline, but rather it's communication. There's tons of different forms of communication that Scripture gives. So give me those biblical forms of communication. Encouragement? Yep, rebuke.
I remember shock, which I wish I could remember that one.
Shock. There was what was it? It was
Good to
in...
be shocked at sin sometimes, but you can't overuse that. Everything your kid does. You remember that?
Yeah. Was it warning or was it rebuke?
That was
No, it was rebuke. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Rebuke.
Entreaty.
Entreaty. Mm-hmm. Warning. Good. You catching on where you can cheat from. Good. Teaching and prayer. Yeah, it's like 2 paragraphs up. It gives the whole entire list. Yeah. So yeah, those are good. And those are all the different types of parental communication that we have. So then he says, communication rooted in God's glory and goodness, His mighty acts, and His grand redemption. So think Psalm 145 that we read. Requires a mom or dad who is overwhelmed by the soul-satisfying goodness of God. Communication rooted in God's glory and His redemption, His grand redemption, requires a mom or dad who is overwhelmed by the soul-satisfying goodness of God. You as the parent must be a person who understands both your own fallen nature and the work of Christ, the work that Christ has done to provide forgiveness of sin and empowerment for living. So in our communication, you understand your own fallen nature, and the work that Christ has done to provide forgiveness of sin and empowerment for living. So in your communication, in everything, we're pointing to the cross. We're pointing to the cross. So we have to generate, in the conversation, you have to get to the place where you're pointing them to the cross. So how do you do that? Well, you have to get to the point where you demonstrate to them, using the situation at hand, their utter inability to obey God's command and to live according to it, lovingly. But also show them that there's forgiveness and empowerment available in Christ. That there's forgiveness, that He's a merciful God, abundant in mercy. So then the how? Well, we appeal to the conscience. We appeal to the conscience. So he begins this chapter with these 4 things kind of going on that he's driving toward. And I put it this way. It's like the trellis and the vine. It's like, this is an illustration I'm stealing from another book, but it's applied in a different way. So what's the structure that we have to have in the home, in parenting? What's the structure upon which this the benefits are growing? Okay, so there's a trellis, but then the vine is growing up that structure and is supported by that structure. So what's the underlying structure of our parenting and of our the way that we have a relationship with our kids? 1, it's full, rich communication. Full, rich communication. And 2, the rod. Rod Stewart. I'm just kidding. The rod. So you have to have both of these. You have to have full, rich communication and the rod, discipline. So this is a big premise of the underlying chapters of this whole entire book. Is he's building it this way. So we're coming to the rod, and actually specifically talking about that next week. And so we'll talk about discipline at length next week. And then as we talk about how to do these things with individual ages, it'll come back up again. So you had to have both. That's the underlying structure that has to be present in your parenting in order for the art form to grow on it. So that's like the science, and this is now we're getting to the art. How do you do that? Like that's the structure. What's growing on that? Well, the vine would be appealing to the conscience. Like, what are you doing using those structures? You're appealing to the conscience, and you're focusing on redemption. Appealing to the conscience and focusing on redemption. Mm-hmm.
So, in the focus on redemption and conveying your communication with it, there's forgiveness of sins. So, I guess I have a situation where I'm not sure what to communicate, and I've been like, so Sully will frequently come downstairs in the morning or after nap time and be like, Mommy, I'm gonna make good choices today. And like, I'm so far listed, I'm like, hold on, what if I suddenly obey your parents? Good choices. But like, I also don't want him to, again, like, leave out that he's going to make a bad choice today. And there will be forgiveness for it. Like, do I discuss that preemptively in a response, or do I wait until after he makes the bad choice or does the sinful thing and then convey that? I guess I don't know where to go with that because he's bringing that down of like, I'm going to be protecting you. Like,
Yeah.
but
Right. Yeah, I think of when God communicates to us, how does he do it? Like, if I were God, I would have started with the cross. But he took thousands of years to get there and build up to it. So the reason I say that is because I think you have to communicate law and communicate conscience. Like, they have to know those things and understand those things before they can understand that they're completely incapable of keeping that law, and they're going to go against their conscience, and they're going to sin against God doing that. So, and then you get to redemption. So I think it's fine, and I mean, y'all, more experienced folks, like, let me know. Like, I think it's fine to like let the law stand as what it is. Let the conscience stand as what it is. I would say praise that. Yeah, that. You know why you have that desire? Because God gave you that desire to do what is right. You know God gave you a desire to do what is right because He gave you a conscience. You don't have to use those words, but, and so that's great, buddy. Let's do it, and like strive to do that. And then when he fails, you're like, you know what? Then you come in with, mommy's the same way. I want so bad to do what is right, but we fail and we sin, and we end up sinning against those that we love, mommy and daddy and God, and then and then bring in the cross after that. So I think it's fine to let it stand, and then because that's coming. I mean, he doesn't necessarily, because he really thinks, I'm going to do it.
Can I just add one little thing? Because I think there are you can't meet God's law, but there are laws in your house you can. And so when you encourage that, like, it's not like, well, I'm sorry, we've set impossible standards for you, so you will fail. It's like, no, all the things we're asking you to do, you can do it.
yeah.
And we're going to help you. Like, so I think that's part of it too, is you don't have to be like, and when you fail, because you will, so.
Despair
Right.
constantly,
Right.
yeah. Even though that's
Sure.
kind of the way, that's the
All
nature of his heart.
All the laws that he has to obey are like attainable.
Yeah.
Like, you're not asking him to, do something crazy.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Romans 2, speaking about conscience, let's dive into this a little deeper. Romans 2, 12 through 16. Maverick's got it for us.
To
Oh, sorry, 12 through 16. Did I say 2? My bad.
all who sin without the law will also perish without the law, and all who sin under the law will be judged by the law. For the hearers of the law are not righteous before God, but the doers of the law will be justified. So when Gentiles who do not by nature have the law do what the law demands, They are a law to themselves, even though they do not have the law. They show that the work of the law is written on their hearts. Their consciences confirm this. Their competing thoughts either accuse or even excuse them on the day when God judges what people have kept secret according to my gospel through Christ Jesus.
Okay, so this is a really helpful teaching. So in Romans, he's presenting these big gospel ideas. So he starts with Gentiles are a bunch of big fat sinners. And you know all the Jews that are reading this are like, yeah, man, they're the worst. And then chapter 2, he begins with, also, you have no excuse. Because you, even though you have the law, you judge them for breaking the law, but you do exactly the same things. So not only are you also a lawbreaker, but you had the truth and still broke it. So how much more do you presume, he says, on God's kindness and patience and forbearance, not knowing that God's patience is meant to lead you to repentance. So he's basically bringing down the hammer on, he's like, Gentiles, yep, they are a bunch of sinners. Also, you are a big fat sinner. And then he talks about that conscience. So God has given the Gentiles a conscience that they break. And he's given Jews not only a conscience, but also the law. And they break them both. And then judge other people for breaking it. So you see what he's doing there? He's like, let the reader understand. It's one of those situations. So then he talks about this conscience. He talks about it. And how that we are given by God, which is a good thing, we're given a conscience to know what is right and wrong. Of course, your conscience is broken too, right? You get those things wrong. But you are given a conscience by God that convicts you. Sometimes it excuses you and makes you think, oh, this is fine, this is good, this is right. And sometimes it accuses you, right? You think about a hardened criminal, maybe their conscience is a little more seared, but they still have a conscience that they are going against. You have a relationship with your own conscience. You can sin against it and become hardened toward it, or you can be sensitive to it and let it work. It's a God-given thing. It's a God-given tool that's meant to work for your good. And it's meant to convict us. It's meant to drive us to what is right. So, appealing to the conscience, your child has that as well. So these are just things that are, I always, like growing up on a farm, when a calf would be born, it's amazing how fast they can walk. They're like a little wobbly at first, but that first is just a few minutes. And then bam, they're walking. Like, why didn't God make us that way? So I've always just thought that. Why can't, my kids do that? So it's fascinating to think about that, but they are given other instinctive things. He didn't give you the instinct to walk within the first few minutes. But he did give you the instinct to know when people love you. And to know when somebody's being hypocritical, like we talked about. And to know right from wrong instinctively. And that's a God-given thing. And that's very, very good. And we appeal to that. We use that in our parenting. That's when you appeal to their conscience and use that as part of the tools that God has given you, or God has given them. Help them to understand their own conscience. Just like you're talking about with Sully. That's a great opportunity to teach him, hey, this is a good thing that God's given you, so that's great. You know why you feel that? Because God wants you to feel that. You want to do what is right. That's a good thing. And that is a good enough lesson, I think, to focus on, is appealing to and encouraging them to use their conscience. It's a good thing. So then, it might be helpful to go there. Everybody turn to Proverbs 23. Proverbs 23. And he wants to, he's basically in pointing to Proverbs 23, drawing out two principles here that are what we talked about, the that trellis and vine situation. So somebody read 13 to 14.
Do not withhold discipline from a child. If you strike him with a rod, he will not die. If you strike him with the rod, you will save his soul from Sheol.
Wow. all, right? I mean, it comes in hard. He's not soft on the rod. He's not soft on discipline. But he also appeals to the conscience. So look at somebody read 17.
Let not your heart envy sinners, but continue in the fear of the Lord all the day.
So you see, you're training them through discipline, but you're also training them to use the conscience that God has given them. So he's appealing to it. Let not your heart envy sinners. Right? I mean, using their own conscience. 19, somebody read that.
Hear my son, and be wise, and direct your heart in the way.
Yeah, one of the, I think in the parent's handbook, he says walk through, just flip through, just glance through the book of Proverbs. And how many times do you see, listen, my son, or hear, my son, or give me your heart? He is appealing to his son's conscience. So Proverbs, in general, I think I've said this before, but I think it's helpful. Proverbs is Solomon, primarily, Solomon, putting his arm around his son and walking him through what he's going to face in life, preparing him, equipping him. He does it through direct teaching. He does it through example. He does it through discipline. He does it through appealing to his conscience. 22? Anybody? Oh, yeah. Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, whoever's...
I started.
Yeah, go ahead.
Listen to your father who gave you life, and do not despise your mother when she is old.
Okay. 23?
Buy truth and do not sell it. Buy wisdom, instruction, and understanding.
How much does that stuff cost? Buy truth, wisdom, instruction, understanding.
Cost time.
Okay, yep, absolutely. Do what? What's free?
The Bible app is free.
Okay, yeah, you can download it for free. Okay. So there is a very real sense in which this is free. It doesn't cost the child anything except for maybe time, right? They have to listen. Diligence and hard work to get it, but in and of itself, they're getting something that is free, freely given, right? What does it cost you, though? Yeah, there's the time. What else? Yeah, emotional. Whew. Yeah. I've got 2 girls, so yeah, I get that. What else? Yeah. Including, Christ-like humility even to the point of sacrifice. Great sacrifice. You could be doing so many other things, but instead you're parenting, which is a huge, huge cost with great, great benefit. Yeah, and then here in 26, my son, give me your heart. Let your eyes observe my ways. So there's the modeling. There's the, give me your heart. Let me appeal to your conscience and to God has given you a heart. Let me help soften it toward the things of God. So he's not soft on the rod, he says. No, he knows the rod gets attention, but the conscience must be plowed up and planted with the truth of God's ways. Okay. You must address the heart as the foundation of behavior. You must address the heart as the foundation of behavior. And the conscience as the God-given judge of right and wrong. All this is stuff we've just been talking about. There it is again, Jesus teaching out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. So the heart is the foundation of behavior. This is why you don't just correct behavior, you get to the heart. The conscience is the God-given judge of right and wrong. You have to shape that conscience and mold it and make it not broken. And then the focal point of your discipline must be your children seeing their utter inability to do the things that God requires unless they know the help and strength of God. The focal point of your discipline must be your children seeing their utter inability to do the things that God requires unless they know the help and strength of God. So let's go back to that, what we were talking about earlier. In one sense, all the rules individually are achievable. Right? You're not saying fly to the moon. You know what I mean? You're not saying fly. I mean, you're not giving them things that are unachievable individually. But you know that when you uphold the law in your house, the rules in your house, it is unachievable to obey it perfectly. Does that make sense? So the expectation for each individual thing is possible. They're capable of those things. But upholding the whole law, the whole rules of your household, right, which should be the same thing, the law of God and the rules of your household should be the same thing. Upholding all of that is impossible for them. And so that's what you're driving for. So in one sense, yes, your expectations ought to be achievable individually. But you know that they cannot, of their own nature, obey right away with a joyful heart. You know, they cannot do it every single time. And so you're teaching them their utter inability in the way that you uphold the law. And so he talks about this standard, like how a lot of parents are like, okay, maybe they're not doing it consciously, maybe they are, so they're not able to reach the standard that I have for them. I want them to succeed at life. So maybe we should lower the standard to something that is completely capable for them. And I think you see a whole generation of people doing that. You know, expectations for children are expectations for kids these days are so pathetic. Like expectations, even if you're just talking about like chores around the house, like expectations for what they do around the house when they're a little bit older. It's pathetic. I mean, even when they're in high school, it's like, well, make your bed. There's a website actually where it was like laying out expectations, and this guy was using an example, and he said it was like ages 6 to 12. It was like, make your bed with help from your mom or help from a parent. And then like some other things that were like really, really, really simple. And then like 13 to 18, it was like, make your bed without help from your parent. I was like, whoa, man. Yeah, it's like, congratulations. It's just, how patronizing is that if our expectations for our kids are ridiculously low? Like, that's not helping anybody. So he says, don't lower your standard, but keep your standard God's standard. So if you lower it, he says, well, let me just read it. Your correction must hold the standard of righteousness as high as God holds it. Correct behavior flowing from a heart that loves God and has God's glory as the sole purpose of life. That's the expectation God has of every single one of us. That's the expectation you as a parent should have of your kids. That's pretty bold. Especially, this is where we're going to differ from the world dramatically. Don't you want your kids to succeed? Why do you have such a high standard for them? That's going to be maybe the thought going on in their head when you're talking to people. So, correct behavior flowing from a heart that loves God and has God's glory as the sole purpose of life. That's the standard. Yeah. Your correction must hold the standard of righteousness as high as God holds it. Correct behavior flowing from a heart that loves God and has God's glory as the sole purpose of life. This is not native to your children. And that's okay. It is all right. It is right, in fact, to hold them to a standard they cannot reach in the grand sense. Does that make sense? So when you're setting expectations in the home, you're not going to ask your 2-year-old to make their bed every day. You see what I mean? But they can help. But you can, you know what I mean? But your standard of their righteousness, maybe their tasks, you adjust to their age. Be reasonable. But the standard of righteousness is the same. It's God's standard. It's correct behavior flowing from a heart that loves God, has God's glory as its sole purpose. If you lower it, he says, if you lower the standard, okay, let's have our standard today is you only disobey 5 times. You see what I mean? When you lower the standard, it robs them of a correct self-assessment.